I didn't want another hybrid mirrorless camera, but the Lumix S1II changed my mind. So this camera I recently got, I actually pre-ordered it, and I haven't really shot much on it yet, so I'm not gonna do like a full review about the image quality or anything like that. More just about things that I've noticed when setting up all my custom settings, changing all the modes, and doing the little bit of shooting that I have done. So in no particular order, here's just a bunch of things. Now, one of the big features with this camera is the dynamic range boost mode, which is an amazing feature. You can just increase your dynamic range only at the expense of readout speed, which for a lot of shots does not matter whatsoever. Having a slower readout or more rolling shutter, in a lot of cases, yeah, not great. If you're shooting sports or wildlife or fast-paced action, not great. But for a lot of other things, you know, like this, I could be shooting this in the dynamic range boost mode on this camera right now. And in OpenGate, I'm pretty sure, according to CVP, it's like 29 milliseconds, which is not as slow as the Sony a7 IV, which I actually sold to get this. Now, as much as the dynamic range boost mode is amazing, there's a lot of modes, and in particular like resolution and frame rate combinations, that you cannot use it in. Probably because data rate's being too high or readouts being too slow or something like that. I'm not sure. But you can use the dynamic range boost mode in 6K OpenGate 3x2 in 24 frames per second. But you cannot use it in all that same stuff in 25 frames per second. I'm in Australia, which is a PAL country, so generally for multiple years, I've just shot everything in 25p. But for some reason, you can't shoot OpenGate with dynamic range boosts on in 25p. I don't know why. It seems like a dumb limitation because you can do it in 24. I understand not doing it in 30 or above, but in like the difference between 24 and 25 shouldn't be that much different. So basically, I can either just shoot in like 16:9 or 241 in 6K and it's fine, and I can use those modes. Or what I actually decided to do is just change to 24 frames per second. And the main thing that sort of I changed with that is obviously 24 frames per second, but then I'm also using a 172.8 degree shutter rather than 180 degrees, so it matches the frequency of the electricity here. And that's the whole difference between NTSC and PAL, is the frequency of the electricity, particularly in the lights. So lights will flicker if I shot in NTSC, but generally with PAL, not so much. And if you shoot 24p, if you set your shutter angle to 172.8, then it works out to actually just work fine. I did a little bit of testing and it seems to be fine. So for the foreseeable future, it looks like I'm just going to be shooting everything in 24p, not 23.967 or whatever it is, just true 24p with the built-in LUTs. So you can obviously load in your own LUTs. It has a built-in Vlog to Rec 709 LUT that you can use as well. But because I generally like to overexpose a bit, and I did a little bit of reading, and it seems like Vlog, like S-Log, you want to overexpose a bit and bring down in post. So I just made a Vlog LUT with that exposure adjustment with the curve, so I can bring it down in the LUT so I can monitor it, what it would actually look like with that exposure difference. And switching on the LUT is separate from the monitor on the screen here and any HDMI output that you have. I like that, but I don't like the fact that I have to then set two separate buttons to adjust it for each of those, or one for each. So currently I've got the back button right here to turn on and off the LUT on the screen, and then I've got the AF on button right here to turn it on for HDMI. And that just seems a little bit annoying. And I understand there are cases where maybe you'd want to see the log image on the camera and the LUT on the monitor, or vice versa, but for the most part, I feel like it's easier just to link them and turn it on and off for everything. So yeah, that's just a little bit annoying that I either need to like go and change settings every single time, put it in the quick menu, or what I have done is set two separate custom buttons to switch each of those on. Speaking of custom buttons, the ISO button right here, normally that will bring up the ISO menu so you can scroll across to select your ISO. Because this has two base ISOs, or if I shoot in the dynamic range boost mode, it has one base ISO. I try to stick to those base ISOs. I don't like scrolling through ISOs because no matter what you're gonna do, you're gonna get a worse image than if you shot at that base. And I'll always then try to adjust my exposure with either lighting or ND. But what I changed it to was to switch the base ISO from the two bases, so 640 and 5000. So that's low and high right there. The annoying thing is it's not just a toggle between the two. For some reason, there's that auto setting, so it scrolls through all three. And that's just a little quirk that I found with this camera in general, is if there is, even if there's two settings, like even with the LUT one, there's only two settings, but it brings up the menu to scroll through rather than just switching between the two options. So I wish there was an option to just have that to switch between those two bases rather than bring up the menu so then I have to press the button twice, or I have to press the button and then scroll across. The good thing is if you just press the button twice, it'll just move twice. Or it'll come up and then it'll move once. So it's not a big deal. You can just press the button 2 or 3 times depending on what you want to select. But it'd be easier if I could just press it once and it switches. Just like what I had on the FX30 that I'm shooting on right now, I set the ISO button to just switch between the two bases. Now going back to LUTs for a second, the LUTs in photo mode have kind of got me wanting to take photos again. Now this camera has a little mode dial under this dial right here, so you can switch between S&Q, movie, and photo mode. And that's a feature that I really liked from the A7 IV, and it's good that it has that. And in photo mode, the biggest thing that sort of has me wanting to shoot photos again, because I just haven't been shooting photos for like the last couple of years, I've barely shot photos, is I don't consider myself a photographer and I don't like editing photos. So I just haven't shot photos because they always require editing. However, if I make or find a good LUT that I can just put straight into this, I shoot JPEGs and then all my photos will just have that LUT already embedded in it. I can use the Lumix Lab app to 1, make the LUTs, and then 2, transfer them onto my phone so that I just have the photos that I've just taken with the LUT already applied, and I can just post them straight from there or do whatever I'm going to do with them. So it just sort of takes out the entire step of photo editing. Now, you wouldn't really want to use this in professional settings, like if you were shooting a wedding or something like that, or, a photo shoot for a brand or anything like that. But for what I want to do with photos is just, when I'm on holiday, just take some photos. Or if I'm just have my camera around and I want to just take some photos, I can do that. I transfer them to my phone and then I've got really good photos with a look that I like because I made that LUT. And just sort of, yeah, it's just got me wanting to shoot photos again. That's pretty much it. Okay, back to video mode now. With the anamorphic D-squeeze, something that I found a little bit annoying, and this hasn't been too much of an issue yet because I haven't really shot anything on anamorphic, let alone on anamorphic with a monitor yet. But if you turn on anamorphic D-squeeze in the camera, and I have it in my quick menu here, so if we go down to, I think that's it, yeah, and then we can scroll across to the different D-squeeze. I also have my C2 right here set up for anamorphic. It's open gate, it's got the D-squeeze already on. That's all good. But the D-squeeze doesn't de-squeeze the HDMI signal, so you still have to turn on D-squeeze in a monitor. And I just find that a little bit annoying, especially coming from the Pixis that I just had for 2 months, that if you turn D-squeeze on, it de-squeezes everything. And like I said, if I have the D-squeeze in my menu here, or if I set it to a custom button, it'll bring up the scroll menu here, so then I can scroll across the different options. However, there's no way to just turn on and off D-squeeze. It would be nice if I can set it to 1.5 and then just set a custom button to toggle on and off anamorphic D-squeeze if I was changing between spherical and anamorphic. Now, I don't think that's going to be a big deal because I sort of set up a whole different mode for anamorphic that'll just always have that 1.5 times on. And then if I want to shoot on a 2 times or 1.3 times, should be easy enough to just change it. But to me, it just seems like a setting that should just be an on and off thing, not necessarily a bring up the menu and select one. Similar to how it happens with the LUT on HDMI and with the base ISOs. Okay, now when it comes to proxies, I recently started shooting on proxies. I think just before I got the Pixis, I started shooting on proxies on my Sony cameras, and that made editing a lot easier. Now, I didn't really need to use proxies with B-RAW because B-RAW just edits so well within DaVinci Resolve. But proxies would be something that I would use with the Lumix S1II. However, it's not available in all modes. So a lot of the modes, particularly the high resolution ones like 6K, you just can't use proxies, which is then a bit annoying because those are the ones that you would want to use proxies on. So that's just not ideal, and I don't really understand why you can't record proxies in 6K. And then with S&Q mode, as I said, we have our photo, video, and S&Q switch. So if I switch it into S&Q mode, I can then just record built-in slow-mo or already slowed down footage, and I don't have to just shoot in 60 or 120 or whatever and then slow it down in post. It just automatically slows it down. S&Q is great for that. However, it seems like so far from what I've seen, the only options are 30 and 60 FPS, no matter what frame rate you're actually shooting in. I was in PAL, everything was in PAL, system frequency was 50, I was shooting in 25p, my options for S&Q were 30 and 60. You can go lower than your frame rate for like time lapses and stuff, but for like slow motion stuff, why couldn't I do 50? Why couldn't I do 100? I just found that a little bit weird. And now shooting on 24, I can still only do 30 and 60, and there's no option for 48 or anything like that, even though I can't even shoot 30 or 60 FPS in the normal video modes. I can only shoot 24, 48, 96 for some of them, and 120 for some of them, because they're multiples of my actual frame rate. So I find that weird that the S&Q mode doesn't allow multiples of your actual frame rate, and it just sticks to 30 and 60 frames per second. Okay, this next one is one that people have talked about already, and it's that while the autofocus in this camera is a lot better than Lumix's autofocus used to be, the tracking autofocus is not as good. Nowhere near as good as Sony's. It doesn't have the feature where you can just tap on the screen and then it'll track it, because that's something that Sony's had for a while, and it's really helpful. If you just want to track an object or a face, you tap on it and then it just doesn't lose that unless it goes out of frame. Whereas with this, you have to set it into the tracking mode and then move the indicator to where you want to track. And I haven't done much testing with it, but it just doesn't seem nearly as intuitive as just touch tracking. And from what I've heard from other people, it seems like that's the big thing that it's behind with in autofocus compared to Sony. Staying on focus, the joystick right here. This, I really like these as a general feature on cameras. I do really like the fact that on the FX30 that it's on the top, not on the back, just because that's where my thumb is when I'm holding the camera, and I have to like, if I'm shooting video with this, I then have to pull my thumb down to press it here rather than just leave it on the top. But I mean, this cage doesn't really allow it for that anyway. But one of the things with that is you can set it to a function button. That's cool. But you can't set it to what Sony calls focus standard, where it'll just basically do a center fix while you're holding it. So it'll just then focus on whatever's in the center, regardless of what else it was tracking. And I found that quite useful when I was shooting with autofocus a lot on my Sony FX30. On the S1II, I have it set to basically the closest thing I can get, which is the focus area, and I can adjust the size of that. I can move it around and everything, and then when I go out of it, and then it leaves that sort of center fix thing, or wherever I put the focus point, it leaves that on the screen until I press the like menu button or the set button to get rid of it. But I kind of wish there was whatever the equivalent would be of focus standard like on Sony. Okay, one of the best features of this camera and other cameras that have this feature, like the Sony a7R5, is the flip screen. So this screen flips out, it flips down, it flips up, and it's also a regular tilty flippy screen, so it can just do whatever you want it to do. If I'm shooting stuff like this, I would then flip it out, turn it around so I can, if I was vlogging, because I totally vlog, but I can see the screen here. But for almost every other case, it's easier to actually just have it enclosed and then tilt it up so I can see it. And that goes for when it's in a rig or if it's just like this as it is. But then it goes even further. One of the issues with having the regular flippy screen out here, if you do have it like in a rig and you have stuff plugged in like HDMI and USB and stuff like that plugged into the side, then you can't tilt the monitor back because those ports are there. However, with this one, you can tilt it not at the hinge there, but tilt the entire thing so it comes back out of the way of those ports. And that's just a little thing that can make a big difference if you're rigging this camera up and plugging things into it. Now, I'm not one to use an EVF all that much, but the EVF on this camera is way better than the one on the a7 IV, which I have had is not great anyway, but I don't know, maybe for taking photos, I might actually use the EVF. For video, probably not. I'll either stick to the monitor on here or an actual external monitor if I'm like fully rigging it up with this. But yeah, it seems like a pretty good EVF. And just like a super minor quality of life thing, when you have the screen fully closed like this, on the a7 IV at least, if you close the screen, like screen face in, the EVF doesn't work. It just turns all of the displays off. Whereas this one, the EVF still displays everything you need to. We'll see if, can you actually see? Oh, you can actually see in there a little bit. So the EVF stays on even if you close the screen like that. And then there's also just a little button here that you can switch between either auto, and then the 2 different displays. Or you can just reset that to whatever else you want as a function button if you don't want that functionality. Another thing that I like that this has in common with the FX30 is it has a record button on the top there. You can also set the shutter to record as well. And it has a record button on the front here. That's really nice. I love cameras that have multiple record buttons because you don't always have your hand in the right spot to hit record. And they're nice and big and red, and you can program them to other things if you want to, but I always leave these sort of record buttons as record, and it's just really handy to have multiple record buttons. And with the mode dial, as I sort of alluded to earlier, at least in video mode, I have C1 set to just my regular everyday video, so that'll be 24p, 172.8 degree shutter, 640 ISO, like low base ISO, which that can easily be changed, and 6K 16:9. And then I have C2 set to my anamorphic setting, so it's open gate, the anamorphic D-squeeze is on, it's set to the anamorphic stabilization. I can't remember if I turned that on or not, but it's just got all my anamorphic settings, so I don't have to change all my settings. If I just change to an anamorphic lens and then change back to a spherical, I can just change modes entirely. And there are 5 modes on here on the dial itself. I don't even think I'll do anything with 3, 4, and 5 because 1 and 2 is pretty much all I need. And settings like frame rates and resolutions are easy enough to just scroll through and change. Although I think it would be nicer if in the menus you could select your frame rate and your resolution sort of separately rather than just scrolling through all the pages and pages and pages of all the options. That is something that I don't think Lumix has done super well, but there is also the whole my list thing, so you can choose your favorites, so then you only ever have to scroll through that list if you don't want to scroll through the list of all of them. And when it comes to those modes, one of the things that people have probably said about these new Lumix cameras, so the S1II, the S1II-E, and the S1R2, is at least in 6K and in 6K open gate and most of the high resolution and frame rate modes, with the S1R2, I guess 8K, they're all 420. Now that is technically not as good when it comes to color, and apparently 422 makes a big difference when it comes to green screen work. I do no green screen work, so it doesn't really affect me at all. 420, 422, probably not going to be a big deal. However, for those people that are saying, oh, it only has 422, it's not as good as, a Sony or a Canon or other cameras that do 422, it still does do 422 in 4K 16:9. So in the settings that the Sony FX3, FX30, A7 IV, in all those settings, it can do 4K 422 in the 24, 25, 30 frames per second. So you're still getting sort of the same level, but then you also have these extra modes, i.e. all the different aspect ratios and resolutions. They're just not going to be 422, they'll just be 420. But it's still kind of more than a lot of other cameras that don't have open gate and then don't have 6K. And I guess one final little thing that I think is kind of useful, especially when you're setting up the camera, not going to be super useful once you've figured everything out and you're all good, but that is how you can set your custom buttons. And if you just hold a custom button, it'll bring up the options that you can change it to. So if I want to set this to a custom button, that's the actual menu button. I can't do that. But let's say I want to change my custom button down here, hold that, and it'll bring up the page of all the options that I can change that to, which is a decent amount of options. A lot of things that I would never consider changing it to, but, a lot of options. And then lastly, something that I did not think that was actually going to be that useful, but is actually the button that's right on the front here, if you can see it, right where my middle finger is there. So I have that set to audio level, so if I press that button, it'll bring up the audio, which takes up a good amount of room on the screen. So if I don't want it there, I can just press it again and get rid of it. And I think that's sort of a handy thing that you can have where you press a button to bring up your audio, you can check it, it's all good, put it away if it's in the way. But I like the fact that it's easy to see, unlike some cameras where it's like really small and in the corner. And that function, turning it on and off, also works with the HDMI out as well. So it'll come up on your HDMI signal if you have info on switched on. There's also a lock switch on the corner here, which you can change the settings for, so you can decide what it does and doesn't lock. Oh yeah, also it has false color in the body itself, which I find real nice. So much better than just relying on zebras or histograms. I do have zebras set to a custom button, so I can use that if needed. So if I want to see what everything looks like, but also have an idea of my exposure, particularly when it comes to peaking, because I have my Zebra set to 95. I can do that. However, for the most part, if I have time to check false color, I'll press my false color button, which is the exposure compensation button right here. That'll turn on false color, and that is just super helpful. So yeah, that's the Lumix S1II. It is an amazing camera. It is going to be sort of my main camera for at least for a while, and then even if I get like a Pixis 12K, I'll keep using this as my secondary camera or my YouTube camera or my photo camera, or maybe all of the above, most likely. But regarding the title, I guess, I made a video a while ago when the S1R2 came out, sort of ranting about not wanting all these mirrorless cameras that keep coming out, because these companies keep releasing hybrid mirrorless cameras that are just photo style cameras with some video features. And as much as I would have liked to keep the Pixis 6K that I had, or to get a Pixis 12K, or to get a camera like this in a different body. So I wouldn't say this is settling in any way, because this is an amazing camera. And to be fair, I still do want to have a hybrid camera, one that can shoot photos, especially with the photo features that this has. But I don't think I need to have all hybrid mirrorless cameras like I used to with the A7 IV and the FX30. So this just sort of had too many good features to pass up. And also, I bought this lens before I even bought the camera, because I bought this for the Pixis and I plan on switching to Blackmagic, basically, with the Pixis 12K. And the beauty of that is then I can use Lumix cameras because they share L-mount, and I don't have to worry about using two different mount systems and have two completely different ecosystems when it comes to cameras. I can use my L-mount lenses on both Lumix and Blackmagic. And I guess Leica if I really wanted to. I don't see myself getting a Leica camera, but you know, it's there as an option. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you want me to talk about in future videos with this. I'm going to post multiple videos about this. This is not a review. I bought this with my own money, and I'm going to make a review at some point. So let me know what you want to know in that review. And I know this video didn't have really any test footage at all, because I really haven't shot much with it, but once I've shot more with it, I'll have more to say. Anyway, go do all the other things, watch another video. I'll see you next time. Okay, bye.